All right, I am joined here by two great guests who've been on the show before. We have Nick Kendall and Sarah Bettinger. Nick, you are with Mile High Huddle. Sarah, you are with NFL Mocks and Predominantly Orange. And the most important thing of both of you guys today is that you cover the NFL draft and you love the Iowa Hawkeyes. So obviously, a great fit to have you on this show as we're doing a big buildup leading into the NFL draft. Iowa has a lot of players who could kind of find their next destination in just under a week from now. I mean, we have a couple guys who could be going in the first round, a couple guys who might go on day 2, and a lot of guys who are going to be kind of searching for their NFL team, either in the 6th, 7th round, or maybe as, priority undrafted free agents. So before we get started though, Nick, Sarah, maybe Nick, you got to kind of go first. What are some of your background? Let the listeners know kind of what your expertise in this area is.
Well, I've been scouting football now, working for Mile High Huddle for the past, I guess this will be my 3rd draft with them now, man. Time flies. Writing for them, doing a lot of draft stuff. I mean, I'm already getting ready for 2020 stuff, which is insane. But I mean, you gotta love the grind in order to be where you're at right now, or be where I'm at right now. Do a podcast. I host a podcast with a good friend of mine, Carl Dumler, friend of Sarah's as well, twice a week now, called Building the Broncos. And just love all of it. And I'm in Iowa City. I live in Iowa City and actually work at the University of Iowa Hospital. So get to be close. Got season tickets last year. Go to a lot of Hawk games, and I watched. I mean, I feel like I watch every Hawks game twice because you get to do the field view, whatnot, when you're at the game. But then I got to come home and watch it again and kind of break down the tape. So I'm definitely a psychopath in that regard, and I love it.
Yeah, man, it's tough. I mean, in the last couple of years, I've transitioned from being just a fan watching football to now starting to analyze some of the pieces, especially with Hawkeye games and Bronco games. I've never used to go back and watch the games multiple times, but now, I watch the Iowa games on Saturdays and then I record them and then I watch them again later just to kind of get a feel for kind of what I want to talk about on the show and also talk about at Dear Old Gold as well. So I definitely understand that. And, Sarah, I talked a little bit about you as well, NFL Mocks and Predominantly Orange. You kind of hit a gauntlet of things with the Fansided Network. Why don't you give some of your credentials as well and kind of what your passion is with the NFL draft?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I may have mentioned this the last time I was on. So first of all, thank you again for having me on. But I was big into like trading cards as a kid, and I love to memorize like when guys were drafted on the back of the card. And that really introduced me to the draft. And I remember one of the first drafts that I watched as a kid, I just remember falling in love with Santana Moss. I don't even remember what it was. I just thought that he was a cool player, just his speed. And I've always loved receivers. And so just that kind of sparked it. And Peter Warrick was always a favorite of mine. I loved collecting Peter Warrick trading cards. I think he was a year before Santana, but, anyway, so it started from a young age, and like even as a kid, I remember collecting like rookies jerseys, like Ricky Williams and even Tim Couch. I hate to even say it, but I had a Tim Couch jersey as like a 3rd grade kid. But I've loved it from the start, and I used to in between classes in school, I would write out like mock drafts and bring like my NFL draft magazines through class. And I'll never forget this one time, this one kid saw me making a mock draft and he's like, "Are you making your own mock draft?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Who would ever want to read anything that you have to write about football?" And I was like, wow. "Oh, dang, challenge is on." So I remember in college, I discovered Bleacher Report, started writing for them, got hooked up with a place called Mile High Report, and started writing some posts for them on just for fun, and I did the same thing at Bleacher Report for a while and kind of mixed between the two, doing what I do now professionally. And so I got picked up by NFL Mocks in 2011 lockout year, which, they love. I guess they were looking to torture some young writer or something, but it was actually really good. I got to cover Von Miller's draft, and from then on I got picked up by Predominantly Orange in 2013. And again, brutal. They lost the Super Bowl right as I was joining the squad there. So been through the highs, been through the lows, and I've loved it from the start. It's a passion of mine. And I think this is a special moment too, because I've not met many Broncos and Hawkeyes and NFL draft lovers. So Andrew, Nick, I mean, this is a meeting of the minds, truly.
It really is. I love that, honestly, I didn't know you guys until about the last year. And I guess know is a very relative and loose term, but nice that we kind of have all, share some of those similar passions and whatnot, and all kind of connected through Twitter and through writing and stuff. So it's pretty cool stuff. And now we're here talking about the Iowa Hawkeyes on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. So exciting stuff. I'm definitely glad you both are on here. And real quick, I wanted to share a story about, you talked about, some of the rookies and whatnot, and Tim Couch and those kind of guys. I remember one of the first things I realized about the NFL draft was that I knew nothing about it when I loved Major Applewhite at Texas, and I had no clue why no teams wanted to sign him after he graduated. I just didn't comprehend it, didn't understand it. And so, yeah, that's a bad one, but it's very interesting to me to kind of, you watch a player and they might have great stats, they might do really well in their collegiate career, but they just don't translate well to the NFL. And I think that's what fascinates me about the NFL draft is just how different it is. It's not just, can you get 15 sacks in, college football? It's what else can you do? And where are you going against high level competition, where you schemed differently and that kind of stuff. So absolutely love the NFL draft. And one of the big things I'm kind of excited about this year, especially being a Denver Broncos fan, is there's some opportunities for potential Iowa Hawkeyes to follow the Denver Broncos. I know, Nick, I follow you a lot, and I think you would potentially cringe if an Iowa Hawkeye was taken at 10th from the Denver Broncos. But let's just jump into it right now with those two guys I'm kind of referencing, TJ Hockenson and Noah Fant. I mean, the two guys who are going to be likely first-round draft picks. Hawkinson's been projected as high as number 5, which I think is a little bit high for him. And Fant's been honestly projected anywhere from 12th through 32. And, some people have been questioning whether or not he could maybe go in the second round. I don't think that's really plausible. But let's start with Hockenson first. What are your kind of, when you look at Hockenson as a tight end and you're kind of scouting him, and I'll leave it up to whoever wants to go first on this one, but what are you noticing about him? Obviously, his blocking and his receiving are fantastic, but is there something else that kind of separates him and puts him as the elite tight end in this class?
I think for me, the big thing is that he does everything well. Some tight ends, it's becoming kind of like we talked about it last time I was on the podcast when, we had these guys declare. A lot of tight ends in the NFL, it's becoming more of a niche position where you kind of have the inline guys, and then you also have the receiving types. Classic, Nick Boyle, Croft getting paid all this money this offseason to be classic inline guys. Then you got the Jimmy Grahams of the world, the Evan Ingrams, who are more the receivers. And that's not TJ Hockenson. TJ Hockenson can do both at a very high level. I'm not sure he is absolutely elite at anything. I mean, there are some elites, but he's not Gronkowski. I've heard some people call him Gronkowski. Let's just put that one to bed. Gronk is a freak of freaks. But as far as being just an overall weapon with no real weaknesses, that's TJ Hockenson to a T. I mean, he's really good in line. He's really good at the zone stretch, whether he's leading or he's cutting off that defensive end, cutting off their legs, so making sure they can't make that backside tackle on that zone stretch. Did that time and time again for Iowa. He can do that really well. He's not amazing down the seam. He ran a 4.7 40, which isn't elite by any means. That's 68th percentile of all tight ends at the combine, but that's fine. And then he did really get good with his jumps. 90th percentile vertical jump, 91st broad jump, 77th 3-cone, 85th 20-yard shuttle. So pretty darn good athlete all around. And the thing that, he's not only – he can make plays down the seam because he is a good athlete, good body control, good contested catch. But a thing that really makes him stand out as well, and George Kittle, we saw it a lot this year with him at San Francisco, is that Hockenson's also a threat after the catch. He's very natural with the ball in his hands, whether it be stiff arms, hurling guys, just making space and making plays after he has the ball in his hands. So really just an overall weapon and probably one of the highest floors of this entire class. There is some debate about, how valuable is the tight end. If you're drafting him at 10 overall, he's going to be one of the top paid tight ends in football right away, where if you're drafting an edge rusher, he'd be like the 25th highest paid player. So it's a little bit of positional value for the slotted rookie contracts getting in there. But yeah, if you take TJ Hockenson, there's no doubt that you're going to get a really good player.
Yeah, and as far as that floor, Sarah, maybe put that question up for you. As far as his floor, where do you think his floor puts him at in terms of the tight ends in today's NFL? I mean, does he instantly enter the NFL as a top 15 tight end? Obviously, I realize he has to prove himself, right? But in terms of talent-wise, do you think he enters the NFL as a top 15, a top 10 tight end already?
Yeah, absolutely, I do, and I'll tell you why. Because I was kind of researching this offseason where the market value for NFL free agent tight ends was. And as you get past, the top 12, 13 guys, you're kind of like, wow, this guy's one of the highest paid tight ends in the league. Wow, this guy's one of the highest paid tight ends in the league. I mean, just kind of down that list, well into easily into the top 15 and 20. You're kind of like, questioning, is this guy really a top 20 tight end? And obviously it's not always the highest paid guys who are the best guys. You've got players like OJ Howard still on their rookie contract who are yet to creep up into that range. But at the same time, I think that, like Nick said, you have so many niche tight ends nowadays, guys who are, specifically designed and tailored to play one certain position in an offense or to be a certain kind of weapon, that Hockenson sets himself apart in the fact that, yeah, he's not as fast as an OJ Howard. Yeah, he's not as big and maybe not as physical as a Rob Gronkowski, but there's really no red flag to his game, and that's a thing that NFL evaluators, they've got to be just salivating at that opportunity. It's kind of like Howard 2 years ago. You were trying to find a real weakness in his game, and there wasn't much of one. I mean, he was more experienced than Hockenson, but he also didn't have if you condense or if you extrapolate the production that Hockenson had, he would have easily eclipsed Howard's at Alabama, but different offenses, et cetera, et cetera. And he also doesn't have that long speed, but at the same time, like Nick said, deceptively great after the catch, does a great job of routes. I think one of the things that I constantly point to with people who ask about why Hockenson is worthy of a top 10 pick, if that's in fact where he's selected, and we know Howard was 19th, so I'm not so sure about it. But one thing that I would point to is the fact that Kirk Ferentz, he's gotten a little bit better about this in recent years, but he doesn't always give young players a chance to especially supplant a guy like Fant, who came in as a sophomore and had that big breakout season. And Hockenson really kind of became tight end one for Iowa this past year. And the biggest indicator of that to me, even though there were many sprinkled throughout the season, in that Nebraska game, who was the guy they targeted on that big 4th and long play at the end of the game? Yep. It wasn't Noah Fant. It wasn't Nick Easley. It was TJ Hockenson. And they put the ball in his hands and he delivered, and they knew that he would. That's something that he's going to have a coach's trust from day one. He's going to be dependable from day one. He works hard. He cares about the game. He cares about his craft, and you can tell that. I mean, 2 years of playing experience, and the guy's just a great route runner. Even if you read third-party, I always pull up third-party scouting reports to see what other people say about him, because I know I can be a little bit jaded when it comes to Iowa guys. But I love this note from the Draft Network when they talk about his blocking ability. They said that he's one of the most tenacious blockers I've ever laid eyes on. That's a pretty great note from somebody who doesn't necessarily have a bias towards Iowa in the least. So I think that there's definitely something to be said about that, his well-rounded game. And I do think he's maybe, he could be considered elite in that category, blocking. And I think he also has elite hands, which matters in the NFL at converting third downs, making plays in the red zone.
Yeah, I think an underrated thing about him is just how good his hands actually are. I mean, he got hit a few times, Nate Stanley put the ball in places where, Hockenson was taking a few hits down the middle, and he held on almost every single time. So something that I think people don't realize just how good he is at catching the ball. And you made one note on there that I want to touch on. OJ Howard was drafted, I think, 18th overall by the Bucks.
19th.
All right. Yeah. 19th. I knew it was late teens. And Hockenson is, in that same tier, I feel like of type of player, not the same player, but like in that tier of, caliber, right? Does it make sense to put him in the top 10?
It really depends on, it just takes one coaching staff to fall in love with a guy. I think probably for me, tight end is a little bit rich at 10, just because I think given overall contracts and whatnot, it's not pass rusher, it's not offensive tackle, it's not wide receiver, it's not quarterback, it's not cornerback. But if you think that guy's a difference maker, and you think you're a tight end away, or you have a young quarterback that could really use a guy like that, maybe looking at Buffalo, who really preaches character in their locker room and wants to run the football, but also can maybe give Josh Allen a guy that can be an outlet for him, not only stretch the field a little bit up the seam, but also can be a dump off after the catch threat. So it depends on what team falls in love with the guy. Personally, though, number 10 overall, I'd probably look to go in the top 10. I'd look to go elsewhere, filling in more high value positions that high. But again, if you think he's that guy, I have no issue with you taking him.
Absolutely. And so what would you say, and we'll briefly touch on this, where do you think he goes then? I mean, you mentioned Buffalo. I've also seen him projected to Jacksonville. I've seen him projected to Denver. I mean, you can pretty much list any team from 7 through 15, and some people have had him projected anywhere in there. So, Nick or Sarah, maybe actually both, where do you think he goes? Where do you think like the best fit would be for him in kind of that, low teens area?
Yeah, I think there's a number of teams that you could look at. Like Nick said, Buffalo preaches high character. That'd be one spot inside the top 10 that I would look at. Another, you could look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think 7 is, that's really rich. You're looking at Vernon Davis range there for a guy who, absolutely lit up the combine and had, he's still going. That seems like forever ago, but he's still going with his career anyway. So I think after the top, or, including the top 10 and after, Denver, Green Bay, I know Miami just took Gesicki, so they're not in on that. Maybe Atlanta, maybe I don't know who's all behind them. Carolina's probably not in that mix. Minnesota maybe looking for a replacement for Kyle Rudolph.
Yeah.
So Minnesota could be the squad, although their offensive line, they might as well have me out there at this point. So I don't know what they're gonna do, but as far as scheme fit, I think Nick maybe can speak more to that. I really know strictly Broncos and pretty much whoever has a similar. So Washington has kind of a similar West Coast type deal. And then obviously we'll see that in Green Bay as well with Matt LaFleur coming from the Shanahan tree. So it's selfishly, I'd love to see him in Denver. I don't know if they'd be able to trade down and still get him, but I really feel like with what Scangarello had in San Francisco with Kittle, and even we can get into this with Fant as well, because he's more comparable athletically to George Kittle, but you see what they had in George Kittle out there and how big of a weapon he was in that offense. I think that's going to become a focal point. And I saw just kind of a quick picture of the tight ends at Denver's minicamp right now. And one of the top 3 guys is Temerick Hemingway. And so, so that's what you're dealing with there. So I don't know. I would bump that up a little bit on Denver's list, especially if they were to trade down off of 10. But I think maybe Green Bay, Minnesota, and those kinds of teams who run the West Coast style offense where he can use that ability after the catch and just the whole gambit of his skill set as an inline blocker, vertical threat, all those different things that he can do.
Definitely. Nick, do you have any other things you want to add to that as well, or any other teams you would like to add as a possible destination?
I think his floor will be Pittsburgh. They just lost Jesse James, and McDonald will be hitting free agency here soon, and they could definitely use a weapon like that over the middle to help the offense. They've lost Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, so they're the team that's looking for weapons there. But I really do like the fit with Minnesota. Their interior offensive line does need work, but if you can add a guy like Hawkinson that is perfect for that Gary Kubiak West Coast run offense that can be learned from or play with Rudolph for one season, that makes a lot of sense. I also would love him in Denver. You saw Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. He ran a very heavy dosage of 11 personnel with one tight end. And if you're running with that one tight end in that West Coast offense, the heavy 11 personnel usage, your tight end's got to be able to do both things. He's got to be able to be a receiver and a blocker. So I think Hawkinson would make a lot of sense. I just think 10 is a little bit rich. But in the end, gun to my head, I think he ends up going to Green Bay. Green Bay spent a lot of money on the defensive side of the ball. They're doing a lot of work on Jonah Williams. I think Jonah Williams is going to be gone by 12. So I think that in the end, Green Bay ends up taking him, giving Aaron Rodgers a security blanket over the middle. And not only that, but helping the run game open up a little bit as well.
Yeah, I have a lot of Green Bay Packer fans as friends, living in Wisconsin for 4 years and going to school near there. A lot of people reaching out to me about what Noah Fant versus TJ Hawkinson means and whether or not they think either of them is worth it or one of them is better. And so interesting kind of scenario for them. I think it would be huge to get Hawkinson in Green Bay. I would, like you said, I would love to see Hawkinson in Denver. If it is a little bit rich or if there's not enough, if they're not able to trade back, then I think it's a great pick as well. And so moving on, I would love to talk about TJ Hawkinson all day. He's just the prototypical Iowa football player, but his running mate, Noah Fant, is likely to be drafted in the first round as well. And what's interesting about Fant is he didn't have as much production in his junior year. Obviously, we talked about that. Hawkinson got a lot more of that production, got a lot more plays that kind of went for him. I think Fant was used more as a decoy throughout the season and obviously used in the red zone a lot more, but we saw some of his athleticism on display in a few games. Then at the combine, he tore it up exactly how we expected him to. Running a 4.5 40-yard dash at 6'4", 249 pounds. I mean, that's incredible. His 3-cone drill was 6.81 seconds. I mean, that's 95th percentile stuff right there. And he jumped 39.5 inches. So, a lot of people look at him as kind of an athletic freak. Mock Draft Bowl has him kind of an Evan Ingram mold, but I think personally, Fant is a better blocker than Ingram and a more developed blocker than Ingram. And I think people might disagree with that. They haven't watched the tape, but with Fant, I want to talk about his blocking because you hear people who maybe don't really watch a lot of tape say Fant isn't a good blocker. And I feel like that's just kind of a cop out. What have you guys seen on tape from Fant that maybe says otherwise, or maybe do you agree with that take that he isn't a good blocker?
Well, if you're comparing him to TJ Hawkinson, who can really get after it, I mean, that's kind of hard. And I feel like people are pigeonholing him just because of you see him move around out there and he looks like a wide receiver. So how could he block like that? Is he an elite blocker by any means? No, I wouldn't say that. But, you threw out the Evan Ingram. He's kind of the athletic package of Evan Ingram. But like I was on here last time, 2 names that I threw out for him were Jared Cook and Eric Ebron. Both guys that, because of their athleticism, their receiving ability, especially down the seam, being a vertical threat, they're not being used as much as a blocker. They can do it, but that's not where they get their value from an NFL team. If you're using him in there, leaving him in there in line, blocking 60, 70% of the time instead of having him out there running, you're not using him to his skill set. So I think that's probably more the usage of his game, but he's a fine blocker. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a strength of him. I do think he can actually get better there. I was happy to see him come at the combine almost 250 pounds with the long arms, pretty good frame. So I do think that there's still a little bit of upside there to improve as a blocker at the point of attack, anchoring in the pass game, etc. But I think he's a fine blocker, and anybody who's saying he is a poor blocker, I think it's either you're pigeonholing him with expectation because of what type of receiver he is, how dynamic he is as an athlete, or you are just looking at him compared to Hawkinson and saying, he's not a good blocker, when in reality, in a vacuum, he's a fine blocker. I'd say he's average for a tight end.
Yeah, I think that especially coming from the Iowa program, where he's gonna be really strong as a blocker in the NFL is assignment based blocking from different positions. So you're gonna see him. He's gonna be able to do the things in line that a lot of college tight ends can't do coming into the NFL. He's gonna be able to do, and he may not be moving Cameron Jordan off the line of scrimmage or anything, but he's gonna be able to go in there and do his assignment and not be just a complete liability. But I think where he's gonna be especially effective is when he is lined up as that big slot, getting to the second level and sealing some outside runs, especially because he, like I said, assignment-based blocking. He's going to know exactly what angles he has to take, and he's going to know the type of speed that he has to go in order to get there. He's not just going to be flailing around out there. He's not just a decoy in the running game out there as kind of like they may throw to this guy, so we need to cover him. That's not going to be the extent of his blocking abilities, essentially, to put it lightly. I think that, like Nick said, he does have to get better in that area, and he does have to become more strong at the point of attack, but that's really not the strength of his game. The strength of his game is playing at 100 miles per hour as a receiver, and then when he needs to, he can come in and block. And obviously, we know, as this is a Hawkeyes podcast, anyone listening to this knows, watching Kirk Ferentz football, you just don't play for Kirk Ferentz unless you can block in some regard. So I do think it is a cop-out for people to just say, to pigeonhole him, like you guys said, with those other receiving threats at tight end like Eric Ebron, Jared Cook, and those guys. Those guys are just essentially just big wide receivers. And that's not what Fant is. Fant played in line at Iowa. He had to. That's the offense. It's painfully sometimes the offense. So it is what it is, what people think, but people who do turn on the tape, they see that he is a willing blocker. He's capable. He's able to do it, and he does need to get stronger there. And he's not Hawkinson there. He's not Gronkowski there, but he's not a liability either. And so I think that's an underrated borderline strength to his game. It's not something that you're going to chalk up there and say, well, this is one of his greatest strengths, but it's something that he's better at than most college tight ends coming out. And I think there's something to be said for that.
Absolutely. And I mean, the way we talk about him, obviously his blocking, it is not on par with TJ Hawkinson, but he does have the ability to stretch the field and be a vertical threat that there's not a lot of tight ends in the league that are like him. And so I think he is almost a bigger matchup problem in the passing game. If you do split him out wide, he's going to be bigger than most corners. He's going to be faster than most linebackers and safeties. So he has that ability to be kind of that game-changing weapon. So what do you guys feel about the talk that he, could go in the second round? I mean, his draft has been kind of all over the place. After the combine, it skyrocketed, but it's really interesting to see kind of how his draft stock is now starting to fold into that, I would say the early 20s to mid 20s. Do you think there's any chance that he falls out of the first round at all?
I think given the lack of elite talent at the top in the playmaker position this year at wide receiver and running back, I think that I can't see a way that he falls out of the first round. I mean, you are seeing teams use the tight end. It's kind of becoming, like I said, a renaissance position again, where these teams, they're getting playmakers there and they're figuring out how to use them. And I mean, the tip of the cap, a lot of people can be kind of hard on Brian Ferentz, but his ability to scheme open and use both these tight ends was very, very underappreciated this past season. Kind of the Gronk versus Aaron Hernandez role when he was with the Patriots in 2012. But I can't see him falling out of the first round because he is so talented athletically. The upside is there. Teams need weapons. We're seeing these weapons get paid big money. And just the landscape of this class. I mean, the top for running back and wide receiver, not great. I do like the depth of the wide receiver class. I don't really like the running back class. But, you got to get your weapons.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's enough teams that have multiple first-round picks. There's enough teams that have multiple second-round picks to kind of be not reckless with their first rounders, but they have the opportunity to be flexible and look at their draft from a big picture perspective from the very start. So you think, you see a guy like Noah Fant at the beginning or even Hawkinson for that matter. And you're looking at, well, is this really the best value for our first round pick? Well, you can get guys like Nick said, if you're targeting a running back or a receiver, you might get the best running back in the draft late in the second round or sometime in the third round this year. You might get one of the best wide receivers in the second round. I mean, it's just crazy how it is. But if you have an opportunity to get an elite tight end prospect, I mean, these guys are both considered top 15 players by a lot of outlets. And so if you're able to get one of these guys in the teens or the 20s even, or even if you're the Patriots in the 30s, and wouldn't that just be, I mean, how it goes? But it just seems that, that these guys are they're particularly good value this year in a draft, like Nick said, where it's not top heavy at the skill positions offensively.
Yeah. And so where do you think, looking at Noah Fant, he's going to be drafted likely after TJ Hawkinson. I have two questions. Do you think there's any chance that he gets drafted over Hawkinson? And what would be kind of the ideal landing spot for Fant? Where do you think he's going to ultimately fall in this draft?
Well, for me, I don't think he will go before Hawkinson. I think that the Hawkinson's ability as a complete tight end is very valued, but also there are questions. I mean, as good of an athlete as Fant is, there are some questions with Fant as a receiver. I mean, I have some Pro Football Focus stats in front of me right now from Mike Renner on Twitter here, and he said 13 drop passes on 91 catchable passes in his career, which is not great. 4 contested catches this past 2 seasons total, which that can be partly because, again, Ferentz did a good job scheming him open, and Stanley was not very Stanley was risk averse. But the main thing that honestly kind of scares me, contested catches for tight ends is scary, but also only broke 3 tackles in his career. So I think that Hawkinson ability as a contested catch receiver, the yak ability, pushes him up above Fant for me, even though Fant does have tantalizing athletic upside. And again, you're talking about some teams. Maybe I could see a team like Seattle go for him, giving Russell Wilson another weapon, really good compliment to Will Dissly, who's the tight end that they drafted in the 3rd round last year that I believe. I could see Houston going after a player like that, although they need offensive line. But I'm very much of I don't draft for need. I draft for talent. Otherwise you miss players. And then Oakland has those 2 picks there, end of round 1, that I could see him ending up there after losing Jared Cook.
I love it. I've seen him mock to the Raiders before, and I think that would be a good landing spot. Be able to learn with him. And I think people don't give John Gruden enough credit, and some of that's rightfully so, but he is a great offensive mastermind. He would know how to use Noah Fant in that situation. Sarah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that kind of that floor, if I'm putting together a mock draft, I wouldn't let Fant slide past 27, where the Raiders have that selection there at the bottom of round 1. Just too good a value there, especially since they have 2 first rounders before then. But like you said, I mean, we've seen him projected anywhere from 12 at Green Bay to all the way down to even probably 32 or into the second round. And so it's it's tough to know right now. It's all about what teams, if like Nick said, you're drafting for talent. You're not necessarily drafting for need, and especially for a team like Green Bay that has 2 first rounders. I know we mentioned them with Hawkinson as well, but if they decide to go a different direction at 12 and he's still sitting there at 30, that's another floor situation. It just feels like he's too good a value, and maybe as Iowa guys, I don't think we're overvaluing where Noah Fant can go. I think he is a special talent, and to Nick's point, that tweet about his dropped passes, I'd be interested. I never noticed him struggling with the dropsies in the 3 years we watched him play. I never really thought, man, like Noah Fant's got issues with drops, and so I went back and kind of looked like those are spread out like 5, 5, and 3 as far as these last 3 seasons. And he didn't necessarily have those contested catch situations because he's so good at creating separation. So that's part of the issue too, is like he's such a good threat in that regard. He beats linebackers, he beats smaller defensive backs, he beats those slower safeties. He's just too big, too fast, too strong, and maybe he does need to learn to be more creative after the catch. I don't know if that's something that you can necessarily learn, but it's definitely worth looking back at the tape when somebody brings up numbers like that, because those are a bit staggering. But I did also look, so he had 91 targets at Iowa, and if he had 13 drops, he had 78 catches. So I don't know, if all 91 of his targets were catchable targets, that'd be pretty amazing. So,
and Stanley is very risk averse. Let's call it as it is. You got to protect that darn football. This is Kirk Ferentz ball we're talking here.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually pretty impressive how many touchdowns Stanley has thrown in his career and how little interceptions he's thrown. But like you said, he's very risk averse, and I think it helps Iowa a lot of the times, but it also can really hurt them in big situations where they need a big drive. So we'll be talking about Nate Stanley a lot, especially on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, and probably have you guys back here next year, because Nate Stanley is going to be a hot topic depending on how his senior season goes. But I mean, we've talked a lot about the tight ends, and I think that's been kind of the huge focus for NFL draft pundits with the Iowa Hawkeyes. But the other 2 guys who declared early, Anthony Nelson and Amani Hooker, I think let's start with Anthony Nelson first, because I think what's interesting about him is he's a big, big guy. There's specific schemes that are going to work for him more so than other schemes, but he did test very, very well, especially for his size. I believe he ran a 4.7 or 4.78 40-yard dash, had an outstanding 3-cone drill time. But he's very polarizing. When you look at the Draft Network, for example, Trevor Sikkema, and nothing against Trevor, he hosts the Locked On NFL Draft podcast here on the Locked On Sports Network. He isn't a big fan of Anthony Nelson, and I think he might have just watched some of the bad tapes of him. But other players or other draft analysts have been very excited about his possibilities as a late day 2, early day 3 type of player. What are your guys' thoughts on him, especially with the idea that he doesn't really convert speed to power as much and isn't as athletic as his testing necessarily says? Maybe kick that over to let's start with Sarah this time.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen a lot of Carl Nassib comparisons with Anthony Nelson just because he's a 6'7", big, long defensive end coming from the Big Ten. I get it. But like you mentioned, he kind of blew us all away with those athletic measurables. I mean, in addition to the 6.95 and the 3-cone, which is ridiculous for a player of his size, he had that 35.5-inch vertical jump. And like you mentioned, the sub 4.8 and the 40 at 6'7", 271 with 35-inch arms. I mean, if you put him, I don't know, you hate to bring it to like, well, if this guy was this way or that, or playing in a different scheme or whatever, I don't know. To me, he has all of the tools and the production kind of to match. I mean, there's been a lot of defensive ends that have kind of just been plug and play guys at Iowa through the years who have been high effort guys, high intensity guys who win strictly based on effort. But I remember watching Anthony Nelson a couple years ago as a really young player thinking, man, that guy's got some juice. That guy's got some burst out of his stance. He bends well around the edge, which is evidenced by that 3-cone drill. He kind of does a little bit of everything well. He may not be the Von Miller types of the world, and that's not necessarily his game either. But as a base defensive end in a four-man front, and even he may even be able to play in an odd man front at times, I feel like he's got great potential. I don't know that I would compare him to Carl Nassib. I feel like his athletic traits are better. And I feel like his ability to play every down might be a little bit better as a pass rusher. But dang, I mean, this guy, he's got high effort, high intensity, and athleticism to boot. I mean, he's an interesting player for sure.
Honestly, I wish he wasn't so tall. Like sometimes, like the Wisconsin game specifically, David Edwards in that Wisconsin power run game was able to run it at Anthony Nelson, and that was probably his worst game because he was losing the leverage battle pretty consistently there, and I was having some issues with his ability to anchor and power. But watching him, I mean, I think it was the Minnesota game where he just dismantled that right tackle a couple times. The thing when watching Anthony Nelson for me is that he's very much aware about his run lane assignments, so he's not going to shoot upfield with a head full of steam and get out of his gap. You know, that's not the Iowa Hawkeye defense. Everybody's got to play disciplined up front. And then, you know, on third down, third and long, you can kind of unleash him. And that's when you saw him, you know, use a little bit more hand usage. He's very, very well developed with a lot of hand usage, push, pull, move. I don't know if he has great bend, but I mean, for a guy, 6'7", 275, whatever he measured at the combine, that's not the biggest deal. I do love the length. He does have the ability to close down on some guys because he's so long. I mean, 34 and 7/8 inch arms. I mean, this guy could have been an offensive tackle if they wanted him to be with that kind of arm length. But yeah, pretty good athlete. I think that he is a little bit more 4-3 heavy end, 7 technique limited, where he's not a true speed rusher. And I think maybe in some, NASCAR packages, he could kick in, play inside with some speed rushers outside of him. But I think his best bet is finding a 4-3 base team that can play that heavy defensive end, maybe right. I think he can play right or left, but keep him where he's at in a 4-3 defense and let him, he'll probably be a 5 to 8 sack a year guy while playing solid run defense if you don't run it at him. He does need to get a little bit stronger. I'm not sure if that's something that's he can put on with his frame because he is a little bit skinny for how tall he is. That's just how it is. But yeah, he's a good player. I'll be honest, I was absolutely shocked to see him test with the agilities that he did at the combine. I think everybody was. I mean, 92nd percentile 3-cone, 92nd percentile 20-yard shuttle for a guy with his height. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense. So he could go pretty high, and the Iowa pedigree and a guy who has the statistics and just a solid player, high floor. I could see him going back into round 2 all the way to middle of round 3 now, where before the combine, when I thought he would test not as explosive as he did, not as agile as he did, saw him as more of a late round 3 guy, just because I don't think he's as scheme multiple as some other edge rushers.
Yeah, I mean, I think his measurables at the combine really made people go back and look at the tape again, just because I'm not to say you don't see that speed on tape, but you're not going to see a defensive end run 40 yards in a straight line, and it's tough to gauge some of that lateral quickness sometimes. But I think it made people kind of go back and reevaluate the tape and see kind of what they have. But I think you're right. I mean, the Iowa pedigree is huge. The strength is definitely a concern. He only had 18 reps on the bench, so not a ton, but that also can be attributed to the fact that the guy's pretty tall. He has a long wingspan. That makes it a little bit more difficult to pop out as many bench press, reps as you would typically expect.
Physics.
So, it just doesn't really work like that very well. So with that being said, what are a few teams that you guys think that would be kind of best fits for Anthony Nelson?
Like we've been talking about, I mean, who runs the 4-3 defense right now? I mean, that's kind of where you're looking at, is a defense that plays a very similar scheme to what Iowa runs. And so I guess I don't know entirely who does that around the NFL. You see a lot of teams using different looks up front, a lot of the 4-2-5 looks anymore, really. And so it's kind of the beauty's in the eye of the beholder here. Do you believe this guy can be an every down player regardless of your scheme? I mean, us as Denver Broncos guys, we heard Vic Fangio talk about how he expects his defensive linemen to be able to play multiple positions or borderline every position. And I don't think necessarily, even though, like Nick said, you may be able to kick this guy inside every now and again, I'm not sure he's necessarily a guy that you want at the 3 technique all the time or playing the 1 technique or something like that. But he can definitely get in there and bat down a pass if you're in an obvious pass situation. And so I don't know. It's kind of the beauty's in the eye of the beholder here. Team needs across the board, whether or not you have to get a guy that can come in. And I feel like he can start as a rookie for some team. I mean, I don't think that's too – if he's going to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick, those guys are expected to compete for starting jobs, in my opinion, unless they're a quarterback. So I would say – you may be looking at a team that's looking for a starting D end in the first 2 or 3 rounds here and looking for a good value, maybe a coach in the NFL who trusts Coach Ferentz and his staff. A team like New England would make a lot of sense in that regard. So I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
New England was one of the teams that I was going to suggest there. They like those lengthy kind of different. They use a sacks via everybody effort. They don't have the 3 guys that are absolutely elite, but they have like 7 guys that can get after the quarterback, and I could see Nelson there with them. They'll figure out a usage for him. I think the Kansas City Chiefs, as they transition to the 4-3 going forward, they have those 2 picks at the end of the second round. They make a lot of sense to me. I could see a team like Dallas. They have the edge rushers and Rod Marinelli. Yes, Rod Marinelli is the 4-3 guy there. He makes a lot of sense for them. I could see a team maybe like the Eagles take him. I know they just re-signed Brandon Graham, but they just traded the Patriots Michael Bennett, who's kind of an inside-outside guy with some length as a big, long edge rusher, so that makes some sense to me. I could see a team like Jacksonville, the Jets, depending on what they do with their first pick. So, yeah, the Falcons make a lot of sense as well. They're really desperate for some edge rush help because Vic Beasley hasn't really totally panned out. Takk McKinley's solid, but I could see them looking at him as well, and also Cleveland, So a guy that he could come in day one as a starter. I do believe that he'd be fine there. Not elite, but I think he could be fine there. But if you could have him be that third edge rusher coming in, working him in a rotation and kind of develop him that way, I think that's the way to go. So the teams that already have 2 guys, that's fine. I mean, you still have 25%, 30% of the snaps left for that third edge rusher. So I think those are teams that all make sense for me.
Makes sense. And moving on to Amani Hooker, another guy who I think it's kind of interesting to see where he would fit in today's NFL. He played that cash role pretty well at Iowa, obviously allowing them to move to that 4-2-5 defense and allowing, Geno Stone to emerge, or it kind of vice versa. It's that kind of a chicken or the egg argument. Geno Stone was ready for playing time, and Amani Hooker was able to come down. He's able to play, in the box, able to play corner, and I think he answers some of those questions about speed and agility at the combine as well. He turned in a sub 4.5 40-yard dash, so some fantastic numbers he had there. I think oftentimes with Iowa defensive backs, they get a bad rep. They play mostly zone coverage. They also, historically have not had the best measurables if you look at Desmond Keener or Josh Jackson, but they also just produce. And so I think that's really interesting with Amani Hooker to see kind of where he's at in a safety class that isn't really very strong this year at the top. And so as far as his fit in today's NFL, where do you see him really playing? Is he a nickel corner? Is he a box safety? Is he going to be, a single high safety? What are your guys' thoughts on what his fit is in the NFL today?
I think he's a really good fit as a cover 2 strong safety or a cover 3 strong safety, specifically cover 2, though, with the ability to come down and play that big nickel role to match up specifically with either big slot receivers or slot tight ends. So, I mean, he tested very similar to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, although I think Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in Florida has a better single high ability. I didn't see from Amani Hooker the ability that you want to leave him as a single high safety very often, but I think that his versatility is key, and any team that's running a zone-heavy type of defense where you can use Hooker's ability to transition routes, hand them off from one zone to another or accept them from a different zone, as well as his ball skills and his ability to keep his eyes on the quarterback. I mean, the NIU game last year where he baited that interception in the red zone was one of my favorite plays of his entire career. It's hard to beat the pick 6 against Ohio State, but just what he did, he was able to follow the zone, read the guy doing the crosser, sees the quarterback's going deep, drop from that zone, get the interception, I think right around the goal line. So any team that's running the zone, a cover 2 team, I think that'd be a great fit for him. He's not super twitchy. He doesn't have great length. He's not a physical hitter, so he's not really a true box safety, but I think the athleticism, the agility, and the ball skills combined with really good instincts make him a really, really solid player and a guy that I think he'll get early playing time right away.
Yeah, I think that this is the type of player who he's going to tick offensive coordinators off all day long on Sundays just because he's such an instinctive football player. We saw that really develop over the past few years at Iowa where he, like you said, he's not the twitchiest athlete, but the guy always knows where to be. And that was especially evident this past year. I remember watching Iowa games just thinking, man, like Amani Hooker, he just knows where to be all the time. And there's something to be said about that kind of high football IQ that defensive coordinators in today's game, like you said, with the zone coverage, I think that he's going to be excellent in that type of scheme. I don't necessarily know that he's as effective in man coverage, but I think he did a pretty good job of that, especially when Iowa was backed up against the goal line. He made some big plays there. So there's definitely that element to his game that's mental that I think is an asset for him. And I think he's being vastly underrated despite that. I think that the physical skills, you look at guys like Maryland's Darnell Savage, I think his name is, just started watching a little bit of him. He's got that twitchy athletic ability, but he doesn't necessarily have the type of instincts of an Amani Hooker. And so that's kind of where you weigh, what does your defense need? Does your defense need a guy who can play a bunch of different positions and play them instinctively, or do you need a guy who's got the straight line speed, kind of that headhunter mentality? And I think the versatility that Hooker brings to the table is what sets him apart, even from some other Iowa defensive backs that have come out in recent years. You look at a guy like Desmond King, who has incredible versatility, but I really liked him more as a corner. I didn't think he'd be kind of a matchup player in the NFL, or even I love the way the Chargers are using him just all over the place. It's great. But I think Hooker I don't know that he can play outside as frequently, but I think he's got the ability to line up in the slot, to maybe learn that deep free safety play, that spot there, and also play in the box too, and just kind of match up and just be that guy who drives offensive coordinators crazy.
Low-hanging fruit here, but a guy kind of does remind me of is Micah Hyde. In the NFL, I project him kind of that defensive back versatility on that back end, not in a dynamic athlete, but just you never see him out of phase. Maybe a little bit aggressive sometimes on play action. I'll forgive that, but ball skills and everything. And I still can't believe Green Bay let him walk, and he's been one of the better underrated safeties in the NFL since he's joined the Bills.
I mean, if you can turn a career like Micah Hyde's, has been so far, that's a pretty good comparison. And obviously the Iowa Hawkeye connection helps that as well. Do you think then, he'll likely be, I would say probably a late day 2, early day 3. Do you think that's kind of the projected range for him?
Yeah, for me, that's where I could see him going. I'd have no issue with the Broncos taking him at 71, because I think he fits their cover 2 scheme to a T. He's literally just a perfect fit for them. But probably more of a mid-round 3 to very early round 4 player.
Yeah, I think with a lot of these Iowa defensive backs, we've seen that for some reason the league just hasn't caught on to how valuable these kids are coming in. And I still don't get it. I know we talked about it months ago when I was on this podcast before, but I just don't understand why they're being underdrafted, other than obviously some athletic limitations, but they've all turned out to be great pros, it seems like. And so I don't know. It's interesting to me. I could see him going, like you said, round 3 to 4. And I think if he goes anywhere beyond round 3, I think that you're getting just an absolute steal. I think you're getting a guy who can start pretty much immediately. I mean, like I said, the football IQ is high, and guys who know their assignments, guys who know where to be, they can contribute right away. So I view him as a day 1 starter at safety, despite the limitations that he has right now athletically. I think that his instincts make him rise above others in this safety class even. And so I think if you get him round 3 or 4, you're getting yourself a really nice deal and a steal, really.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I would love to see him. Obviously, I love seeing all Iowa Hawkeyes join the Denver Broncos. I love seeing Josie Jewell there, even though he's probably not the best fit for Vic Fangio's defense now. But I love all seeing Hawkeyes join the Broncos, and I would love to see him play that strong safety position next to, Justin Simmons. And so that kind of does it for the 4 main guys that have been kind of the big talk of everyone in terms of draft analysts and whatnot. But now I want to focus on some of the lesser known guys, the guys that Iowa Hawkeye fans know, but NFL draft analysts are not talking about nearly as much. And, we only have about 20 minutes here. So we're going to go through some of these pretty quickly. Ross Reynolds had a great pro day, put up a lot of reps on the bench press, 27 times at 225 pounds. He's been mocked. I saw Matt Miller mock him in the late 7th round. And we've talked about this. I talked about this with both of you guys, but Iowa offensive linemen typically get a chance just because they're coming from such a good offensive line coach, with Kirk Ferentz and Brian Ferentz having that familiarity with the NFL blocking schemes and whatnot. They're coming from a pro style offense that translates really well. Do you think Ross Reynolds, and maybe even let's include Keegan Render in there, although I think they're definitely different players, do you think they find their way into the back end of the 7th round?
I think that Reynolds will, although I can't speak to his versatility. He's going to have to show that he can also snap the ball and play center at his size and multiplicity for offensive linemen. Unless you're that true and blue left tackle, then you probably need to be able to play multiple spots. And I can't speak to that, but with how I was told he tested at the pro day and looked at the pro day, and again coming from that Iowa pedigree, especially working with Polsek and Kirk Ferentz and that zone blocking scheme, somebody will take him, whether it be 6th round or 7th round, just a scheme fit, and you're going to get a pretty safe player there. And why not take a flyer on a guy like that? Again, it's turning the Denver Bronco Iowa Hawkeye podcast, but again, Denver has a lot of needs on the interior offensive line. They're going to run a zone system. Seems like a perfect fit round 7 for them. If they have the whose pick do they have in the 7th round? It's somebody picking very late. I think it's Houston. They have Houston's 7th round pick, so makes a lot of sense there. Keegan Render is another guy. I do think he has some versatility as well. Smart player. I'd probably a priority free agent, but whether he makes a 53 or as a practice squad, he's going to be making some money playing football, in my opinion. Not the athlete that Reynolds is. You see Reynolds run that zone stretch, and he moves pretty darn well. Not overpowering, despite what the bench press says on tape, but the athleticism, the functional strength, I think are more than fine, and he'll find some team if he can latch onto his own blocking team, especially if he can show that he can play center.
Yeah, I definitely agree on both accounts. And like Nick said, multiplicity on the offensive line is such a big deal, especially in today's NFL where some teams aren't keeping as many guys, but they're definitely asking guys to play multiple positions if the need should arise. And so the more you can do, the better. And so with both of these guys, I think that's the key is they're well-coached players. They're coming from a place where they're getting great training, great development, and that's valuable in today's NFL. And they're both, and these guys they both have some experience. Not a lot for Reynolds, but they've got some experience, and they're going to come highly regarded from a Kirk Ferentz team. That's important. It's all about who in the NFL, and so these guys have that advantage, and they also have the advantage of guys who have gone before them. Offensive linemen from Iowa. That's kind of just something even the non-Iowa people know that if you're an Iowa offensive lineman, you're going to get a look. So even if they're late round picks or priority free agents, they're going to get a chance. They're going to get a shot to provide some team with some depth.
Yeah, just look at last year. Ike Bucker, injures himself early in the season, still gets a tryout, and now, is on the 53-man squad for the Buffalo Bills. Dan Doring a few years ago, 5-star recruit, barely played at Iowa and still got a tryout in the NFL just because he's an offensive lineman from the Iowa Hawkeyes. So that'll definitely be some interesting storylines to watch. What?
Austin Blythe.
Austin Blythe, he was a 7th-round pick for the Colts, right? And then got cut, and now he's one of the top guards in the NFL.
Yeah, despite his Super Bowl performance, which was a little lower, but yeah, no, that's the guy who comes to mind. If Austin Blythe can latch on to that zone team and center guard versatility, that's the blueprint.
I love it. And so turning some of the focus to the wide receivers now, and you guys both know, I talk a lot about Nick Easley. I'm always going to talk a lot about him until he eventually becomes irrelevant, which I hope is not anytime soon. But Nick Easley and Kyle Gronowig, both had pretty fantastic pro days. Nick Easley, we've talked about this, Nick. We were told that he was going to run really well in a lot of different metrics, and measurements and whatnot. And he basically did that. Turned in a sub-7 short shuttle time, which I believe I tweeted out that was actually better than all but one person's short shuttle time in the combine, which is incredible. Same with the 3-cone drill. He was in the top 5 if they was comparing to the combine performances in both of those, metrics and measurables and whatnot. He doesn't have as much of that straight line speed. Obviously, he ran a mid 4.5 40-yard dash. One of the interesting comparisons, though, for him is when you look at Mock Draftable and try to match up what would make sense for him, right? What makes sense for Nick Easley. He very much tested just the same as Julian Edelman did when he was coming out of school. And I think he fits that mold pretty well of that slot receiver, a guy who probably isn't going to be drafted, but could find his way on an NFL roster and do pretty well. So wanted to get your thoughts on Nick Easley first before we touch on Kyle Gronowig briefly. But do you feel like there's a spot for Nick Easley if he enters the right scheme as a slot receiver in today's NFL?
Well, I mean, we saw what Adam Humphries and Cole Beasley just got paid on the open market. The points that we made earlier about tight end kind of becoming a more specialized position, that's even more true for wide receivers. The classic team building cliche is you want to build a wide receiver course or a wide receiver squad like a basketball team. You got your guys who go above the rim and kind of do that. You got your slashers and you got your ball handlers. And he's a classic point guard for a team. I'd love to have him in a team like New England. I mean, I'm not a New England fan by any means, but that makes a lot of sense. But any team looking for that classic, short, quick slot that can get open in a hurry, that can get you that 3rd and 2 and uncover quickly, perfect fit. So whether he's a late 7th round pick, mid 7th round pick, late 7th round pick, or priority free agent, he's another guy that is going to find a role and make some money in this league. We'll see how big of a role he can get. He's going to have to get a chance. Again, covering the Broncos, another guy like that, River Craycraft. There's a lot of those guys in this league that can fill that role. But if he can show that and that speed does translate beyond that pro day, which, we saw on tape, I think he would have even been more utilized if Iowa didn't have such great tight ends this past year because, you have the choice between playing 2 tight ends or playing easily in the slot. You're probably playing the 2 tight ends. So that's something that I'll be looking forward to. But I think he could have a long and really solid career. Am I going to call him Julian Edelman, though? That probably not. But
we might want to hold off on that considering he's a Super Bowl MVP. But I agree with that. Another option I think could be a good fit for him is potentially the Jets with Adam Gase. We saw what he did with Wes Welker down in Denver and whatnot. And he just had a tryout with the Buffalo Bills. So some other teams to keep in mind. Sarah, what are your thoughts on Nick Easley?
Yeah, I'm looking at the pro day numbers right now, and I'm pretty. This is the first time I'm seeing him, so I'm pretty blown away by this. Man. Yeah, this is great stuff. So he's well built at 5'11", 203, the 36-inch vertical, obviously very explosive. The 6'5", and the 3 cone, that really stands out as. That's a pretty crazy number. So you're talking about a guy.
I was lying, but always take pro day numbers with a small grain of salt.
Yeah, that's true. Even if you knock 0.2 of a second off that's still really good. So you're talking about elite quickness and talking about really good explosiveness with good size. That's pretty impressive. So if you get him into a program that especially with an established quarterback too, if you get a guy like that into an offense where the quarterback knows how to use the slot, and a guy like that who can create separation with quickness, that guy can be a weapon for you. And we've seen it. Obviously not everyone is Julian Edelman, but let's not forget Julian Edelman was a 7th round draft pick, former quarterback at Kent State, who, if he had gone to any team besides the Patriots, would he have amounted to anything? That's hard to say because we don't really know. But he went into a perfect situation and worked his butt off and did what he does well. Those guys stay in their element. Wes Welker, he was always in his element. He didn't have to be somebody else that he wasn't. He was able to just be a great slot receiver for many years. And thankfully for those guys in the NFL today, like you said, with Humphries and Beasley, even Golden Tate, that position has been glamorized really now, and it's being heavily utilized. So there's definitely a place for a guy like that, especially with that kind of explosiveness and quickness in today's NFL.
Yeah, and another guy who had some pretty explosive times was Kyle Gronewig, which I think kind of came out of nowhere. He ran a 4.43 40-yard dash, had a 6.76 3-cone drill, and a 4.08 shuttle drill, checking in at 5'9". When I was looking at mock draft, this was kind of an interesting comparison, but he most closely resembled Devin Hester in terms of his, actual measurables. That being said, I didn't see a lot of that explosiveness on film. I didn't see a lot of that in the return game, and he didn't offer as much at wide receiver. I think when people kind of talk about wide receivers coming out of nowhere from the Iowa Hawkeye program, they typically refer back to Riley McCarron, who ran a 4.36 40-yard dash, I believe. Do you think running that 4.43 40 is enough to get him at least a camp spot? And do you think there's even a chance that he makes, maybe a practice squad? Because I just think he didn't show much on tape at all this year, and I personally would have rather had Ihmir Smith-Marsette in the return game than Kyle.
Yeah, for me, I think it's going to have to be special teams that really makes him his due. That's got to be what it is. So just because the tape isn't really there, the sample size isn't there, probably would have been maybe, cover your ears, Iowa fans, but maybe it would have been better off going to a team that's a little bit more pass happy and uses the wide receivers more. But he's got a chance, but it's going to have to be special teams where he makes his mark.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Especially, if you've got that kind of speed and quickness, I mean, that's where you can really make your money, at least to start. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the way that you can make a 53, you can make enough plays in preseason and training camp and prove that you're worthy of a top 53 spot, or at least, that 54, 55 range where you're one of the top guys on the practice squad, that if somebody gets hurt, they're looking to bring you up because you can contribute right away on game day. So that's what those guys have to do. The Kyle Groneweg types. I mean, you've got to prove that you can be valuable in case a team needs you. And so he's got a long road ahead of him for sure, not having the tape to go along with those measurables, but definitely those traits are worth looking into for some team.
Yeah. And to keep it, I don't disagree at all. A couple other guys in this list are going to be in that same kind of boat, I think, of whether or not they're going to get even kind of a shot. We're not going to talk about them a lot, but we have Brady Ross, the fullback, had a 39.5-inch vertical, which was eye-popping considering, he's 250 pounds, big bulking guy at 5'11", I believe. And then Sam Brinks struggled at his pro day, injured, hurt his hamstring, didn't get to compete in all the drills, but likely he'll be lucky to get, even a kind of a training camp invite or a tryout. I don't foresee him going very far. So we're going to skip past those guys. But another guy who tested pretty well like Groneweg was Jake Gervais. And when you look at, it was interesting, when you type in mock draftable and you type in Amani Hooker, his times were almost exactly the same as Jake Gervais's, which I thought was pretty funny, all things considered. I didn't see that athleticism as much with Jake Gervais, but they had the exact same 40-yard dash, pretty similar verticals, 3-cone drills, and the only difference is Amani Hooker is a little bit shorter than Jake Gervais. From a playing standpoint, I think Iowa fans have been frustrated, I think, with Gervais's play in the past. He struggled early in his career, even in the Outback Bowl, had a drop here and there, but also made some pretty big plays. Do you think his only role in the NFL is probably going to be special teams? And do you think, running a 4.48 40-yard dash at 6'1", 210 pounds, is that enough to get him a camp invite?
He'll definitely get a camp invite. I think if he would have ran a 4.5, he would have got a camp invite. I mean, a lot of people that I've spoken with, he's a Davenport Assumption High School graduate, I do believe, and a lot of people speak highly of his intelligence. Listening to him talk, you can definitely tell that he's an adult out there, which is, a lot of NFL coaches will appreciate that, especially when you're trying to run practices and whatnot in the summer. He's going to come in and do his job. Again, grain of salt with the pro day numbers, because those tend to be favorable to the player and the school that's hosting. But I think that he showed enough, and he was all over the field in that Mississippi State game. Really good player in there. I think he had a pretty big interception in that game as well, if I do recall. But no, he's definitely a guy that I don't think we'll hear his name on draft day, but he's going to get a chance. He'll be a priority free agent, and hopefully he'll be on the roster for a while and maybe makes a practice squad, maybe even makes a 53. We'll see. But I think that the athleticism, the tools, and the intelligence that you want from a heady position like safety is all there. Am I expecting him to be a starter in the NFL? Probably not, but I think another guy who's going to get a real chance to make money playing football.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you post those kind of numbers, there's a chance. And kind of reminds me of a situation last year, or was it 2 years ago now, with Ben Neiman. I know they don't play the same position, but kind of an underrated guy throughout even his time at Iowa. He was kind of overshadowed by the other linebackers there. Did a lot of things really well, tested really well at the pro days, similar type of way. Was an undrafted player for Kansas City and ended up making their squad and playing a decent role for the team. So, and he probably's got a role going forward as well. So that's the type of, if you're just a smart, heady player, you do your job, you're athletic enough to keep up with the other guys in the league, those are the type of guys that do make, and they make 53-man rosters ultimately is what they do. And even if he's a practice squad guy right away, you've got a chance with those measurables, that experience that he got at Iowa, the work ethic, the intelligence, it all adds up, and coaches love that.
Yeah, I think he'd be a good, at least a good camp addition. We saw Bo Bauer at Denver Broncos camp last year, at least a body in camp, and probably going to make it a little bit farther than Bo did. The other two guys on this list of people we want to cover on today's show, and we're kind of running close on the time here, but on the defensive line, Matt Nelson and Parker Hesse. And I'm going to start with Parker Hesse first, because I think what was interesting about his pro day was that he worked out as not just a defensive end, but also a fullback and a tight end. I'm going to pop this question up for both of you. Do you think he plays tight end or fullback in the NFL, or do you think he sticks a defensive end? And I guess part two of that question, with that versatility, does that make him more attractive? And I think that's a pretty obvious answer, but does that make him more attractive as a prospect?
Well, it just means he's more likely to help your team in a multitude of ways. He's just trying to find a niche and a role, and I probably would keep him at edge personally, especially with his run defense. I don't know if he has the juice that you're looking for as that pass rusher there, but I'm fine with him at edge. But, again, he's a guy that Kirk Ferentz would go to bat for. Every single time, reporters and whatnot would try to bring up A.J. Epinesa, Kirk would be like, well, Parker Hesse's really good. So that speaks really loudly about the character of the kid. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Again, a lot of these guys, the NFL draft used to be many more rounds, and now you got this flurry of activity afterwards where all these undrafted guys get picked up. He'll probably be an undrafted guy. If Ben Neiman is not even drafted, he wasn't drafted, right? He was undrafted free agent.
Yep, he was undrafted.
Yeah, silly. That doesn't make any sense. But if he's not drafted, then probably you don't see a guy like Hesse drafted, but he's going to have a chance to, again, make money playing football, and I would probably take him over Gervais even. But I value defensive line probably more than I should.
I think anyone who follows you on Twitter knows you love pass rushers. And
go hit the quarterback. Go hit the. That's why, man. Epinesa's my guy. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, what is your take on Parker Hesse?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's worth bringing into an NFL camp, especially if teams are asking him to try out at those positions. That they've thought about ways to use him already, which is an indicator that there's interest. And so even if it is as an undrafted player, this is a guy that they've seen some things on tape that they like. They feel that they can maybe use him two ways. We know a guy like this is going to have to, again, you're going to have to make your way contributing somehow on special teams. So if you can do some things as a fullback or as a tight end, catching some passes, whatever the case may be, in addition to playing some defensive line and being part of the rotation there. I know that he did a good job with that at Iowa, not necessarily on the level of Epinesa, of course, but he did some good things and he put some good things on tape. And so there's definitely a role for a player like that, like Nick's been saying. He's going to make some money playing football, and it just depends on what team prioritizes that versatility.
Yeah, and to kind of wrap it up, Matt Nelson is another guy who people are kind of wondering where he fits into today's NFL. I think he's a little bit small on the weight size for playing inside. Didn't get as much tape on him playing at the edge position, and also incredibly tall as well, just like the Anthony Nelson mold, but not in that same athleticism build as him. Do you think he has a shot on an active roster, or is he unfortunately just kind of a weird, awkward size, and he's going to probably just end up being a doctor?
Not a bad way to go.
Yeah, at least you could have worse second options.
Yeah, probably. He had a pretty good sack in that Iowa State game. He does have some size to him. Honestly, again, another guy that I think maybe would be better off playing offensive line, playing offensive tackle, but they needed bodies at defensive tackle, but he's just so tall. He doesn't really have that girth that you're looking for that defensive tackle, unless you're a 5 technique kind of guy that has some burst, but I don't really see that with him. So again, he'll probably get a chance to make a roster, but I think he probably ends up going the medical school route when it's all said and done.
Yeah. Do you think he has the athleticism to play? I've heard that as well, talks about moving him to the offensive line. The Chiefs did it a few years back with McKenzie's son. But do you think, Is it likely? Is it good enough chance that someone would be willing to spend a practice squad spot on him to keep him kind of progressing towards that? Or is it at this point, if he does, he probably isn't going to be able to even do that even in camp, or show the abilities in camp to do that?
He's a guy that would have benefited tremendously from the AAF, unfortunately, that kind of guy. So
rest in peace.
Yeah, right. RIP. But probably not. And also, I don't know how long he would really care to toil at that, if it isn't progressing so well when he has such an option as medical school looking to be an orthopedic surgeon. So I think he could, but he has other options that are more obtainable. But, smart kid, really highly thought of in the program, I'm not going to bet against him.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. You know, you just give the guy a shot in camp, see if he can stand out, see if he can make some plays. And that's really all there is to it. I mean, ultimately, if he gets into an NFL camp, those measurables kind of go out the window unless he starts getting clearly overmatched. And if some team sees the potential in him as an offensive tackle and sees some sweet feet in him or whatever the case may be, you know, you maybe give it a shot. But if he's really die hard into football, you guys, you know, the XFL, February 2020, I mean, if we're looking at a developmental league, you never know.
I mean, Vince McMahon wants high character guys. Apparently, you can't have been arrested ever, and so that'd fit pretty well for Matt Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Well, hopefully that league will actually stick around for longer than a year. I'm bummed that the AAF folded. I think it folded prematurely, and they probably should have got a better partner in there who was more willing to see it through some of the riskier times. But that's another story for another day. Nick and Sarah, I do appreciate you jumping on the show today. Obviously, took an hour and 15 minutes out of your day to help give Locked On Hawkeye fans an opportunity to kind of get a feel for what to expect in the draft that's going to be, at this point, as this airs, coming up this week. So I'm really excited for the NFL draft. There's a lot of Iowa Hawkeyes who are going to be making NFL or signing with NFL teams, getting drafted with NFL teams. I think more so than we've seen in some of the past years. So a really exciting time for Iowa Hawkeye fans all over. Nick, Sarah, do you guys have any last parting words of wisdom that you would like to share with the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast crew? And maybe I'll shoot that to Nick first, then I guess.
Nothing really, just appreciate the ride and appreciate coming on here. Any chance we can talk football, you guys can find me on Twitter at Nick Kendall, MHH. It's KENDELL. If you ever have any questions about football, I'm pretty active on there, and I like to think I'm pretty nice on there. That the reputation of being Iowa nice, got to hold that up. But yeah, just ready for football to get here. And once the draft's over, I'm going to be a sad dude for a little bit. Those months from May to July are the down months. I'll be outside fishing, disc golfing, trying to enjoy the weather. But man, football 365 days a year is what I'm about.
Yeah, and real quick, I have a question for you. You talked about preparing for the 2020 draft. Real quick, AJ Epineza, top 10?
Oh yeah, top 10. Yeah, absolute freak. I do worry a little bit about the depth at edge for the Hawkeyes, just because you got to keep him fresh, and if you're having him out there playing really tough sound run defense, then that can kind of limit how much juice he has left on those third downs. But I mean, the size he plays with, the power, the hand usage, I mean, even the bend at his size, I think there's no doubt that, in my opinion, barring injury, knock on wood, but I think that he is definitely a top 10 talent, and he will be in discussion as Edge 1 next year with Chase Young from Ohio State, who's a little bit more twitchy, but doesn't have the power and overall size that Epinesa possesses. But also don't sleep on Golston. I'm really high on him as well.
I think he has a lot of potential as well. I'm excited to see. I mean, the Hawks have a lot of guys coming up that people don't realize have great potential futures in the NFL, which we will talk about on another day as well. I'm excited to obviously start covering the 2020 NFL draft with the Iowa Hawkeyes as well. So, and thank you, Nick, for jumping on. I do appreciate that. Sarah, any last parting words for you, buddy?
Yeah, like Nick said, I'm super thankful to be on here. I am the mean guy on Twitter, so no, just kidding. I love interacting with people. I love to just talk whatever. If it's football, if it's Hawkeyes, Broncos, doesn't matter. I know Nick's a Cardinals fan, so if we need to just pray for healing for him in that regard, I like to do that on Twitter as well. But it's a fun ride, man. It's cool that we get to be connected in this way. We get to be connected through social media, through Twitter, through sports. It's such a powerful thing, it's just fun. It's amazing that from all different parts of the country, some people from even, all over the world are interacting here at the same exact time. It's just so much fun. So for all those who are listening out there, just continue to enjoy the ride, be civil, but have fun with it, and don't just follow the crowd. Have fun with it, form your own opinions, and go Hawkeyes.
And don't take yourself too seriously. Don't be a jerk.
Exactly.
Don't take yourself too seriously.
Exactly. Andrew says his internet cut, so thank you for joining the Locked On Huck.
You and me? Okay, what's going on?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, he just texted me, said my internet literally cut out at the end of that show. Sorry about that.
Well, that's perfect timing. Thank God.
All right. Well, yeah. For Nick Kendall, I'm Sarah Bettinger. You've been listening to the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast.
Go Honkos. All right. See you, bud.
All right, man. See you, Nick.